Welcome to another episode of the All Turtles podcast, a show about entrepreneurship and AI. I'm John Cifuentes, co-founder at All Turtles. Today, I'm interviewing Susan Gonzales, who is a strategic communications consultant for AI startups with a particular area of expertise in diversity-related issues. Her background includes 5 years at Facebook, where she launched a community engagement program that gave her some unique insight into the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. Then, we did something in this episode we haven't done before, which is to include some of the conversation that Susan and I recorded when the mics were on before the actual interview started. Susan asked me how All Turtles came to be, and for the first time on this podcast, I recount a version of the All Turtles origin story. And of course, Phil and Jessica joined this episode to answer a listener question, and we also share our first AI use case that is an anti-AI use case. So we're here today with Susan Gonzales. Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Susan works on strategic communications, particularly with an expertise in AI in diversity, which is super interesting. And previously, I was looking into your background on LinkedIn and some tough gigs. So Comcast, doing strategic communications during a interesting time in that company's life. Mm-hmm. And then onto Facebook, doing similar work or somewhat similar work, building a community engagement program.
Right.
So I'd love to hear more about that. At Facebook, you launched this community engagement program. Mm-hmm. Just can you explain what that is, or what it's comprised of, if it's still going?
Sure. Well, let me just give you a snapshot of the background. Is what I've learned over years in corporate communications, and then in community outreach efforts and external affairs. I've learned over the years how important it is to clearly communicate. Is everybody saying the same thing? Whether it's about the company or a product or an issue, a crisis issue, or just on the street, and I've learned that that is key, and particularly with startups. And so with Facebook, I joined, we were still in Palo Alto at the time. And while most of my career was in communications, I was really interested at that time to really focus more on the community outreach, which is always, of course, everything is joined at the hip with communications. So I was able to bring that background into this. And so essentially what I saw, there was an opportunity for Facebook to create community outreach as a young company. There was nothing going on at the time. This was way before diversity was even a hot topic in Silicon Valley. The company was about to move to Menlo Park, which for those outside of the area is literally right across the street, from one of the lowest income areas in California. So what does that look like, right? And I could just see opportunity in the potential, for outreach. So I met with, through a friend, I was in DC at the time with Comcast, and I wanted to come back to California. I mean, I have a home here in the Bay Area. I just wanted to come back. My parents were getting older. And I was not going to stay on the East Coast the rest of my life. And so through a friend in DC, I met the head of communications and policy at Facebook. And I'll never forget it, the greatest guy. And we sat down and he said, when Ricky tells me to meet somebody, I meet with them. So here we are. And I just was talking so fast, and I brought printouts, and I brought, testimonials on how effective clear communication and outreach can be for the business, right? This isn't just a feel good, you should really do it because it feels great. This is no, this is strategic. You can do good in the community, you can be really smart about it. And a lot of talking. I was and this and this and this. And it took a bit, but I ended up getting hired on as the director of community engagement, and walked in, and there was, a blank slate. And I was is anybody going to help me here? And I just launched it.
When was this in Facebook's lifespan? 2011-ish? Or?
Mm-hmm. 2011. It was before the IPO.
What was the brand at that point, or what was the public perception of this? It's hard for me to even recall.
Oh, it was. Facebook was just hot and growing. News feed was actually fairly new at the time. So that was, anything going on with newsfeed or timeline. I mean, those were the things that were happening at the time. I'll never forget going to an employee meeting. I think it was probably around, I don't know if it was 2011 or 2012. Must have been 2012 because we were in Menlo Park. And Mark held up a cell phone and he said, everything's going to be going mobile. we're going mobile. And that was like this revelation.
Yeah, it's like an anachronism. Yeah.
And he was right. That's how things, have evolved. So, that's where we were at the time.
It's interesting where that was the conversation versus like the algorithmic bias within the news feed. And, it was just pre all that. It was more just, let's use this interesting platform that shows me all the things I want to see. And I think filter bubbles was the phrase at the time.
Yeah, it was calendar-wise, it wasn't that long ago, but it was a long time ago in tech and at Facebook.
Right. So how do you observe Facebook's current status in terms of its community and outreach and, maybe defense at this point of the brand?
Yeah. It's interesting. I was there for 5 years and I got to know particularly Mark and Cheryl in different ways. I've been mentoring underserved community youth, Latino youth, actually, from East Palo Alto with Mark for almost 8 years now.
Oh, wow.
And that's how I know him, right? He was never, of course, he was the CEO, but I worked under Cheryl. So that's my relationship and my understanding of who Mark is as a great dad, as like a committed mentor. We've been with these kids for 8 years now, and they're in college. And so I come from a different perspective. And then even with Cheryl, I worked with her very closely on the launch of Lean In and Option B, and always kind of asking her, like, do you have diverse voices? Are there diverse perspectives? And once I quit, she called and she said, okay, now you're not an employee. Will you join my board? So those are my relationships. So I know them from that perspective.
Yeah.
It's sometimes tough to watch and hear the news, having those two people that are my friends get torn down. Having said that, I can understand, the privacy concerns for sure.
Yeah, and I think, in defense of Facebook, we demonize these people that, they built an amazing product that millions and or billions of people want to use, and maybe there isn't a nefarious intent, that they're just reacting to what's happening, and which is dangerous. I think of Travis and Uber in the same way. Built an incredible product that's insanely useful, but I guess on the communications front, you see these poor decisions being made over and over again, and sometimes they become a little indefensible.
Yeah, I do hear that, and I do see that, and at the same time, I always come back to they're humans. We're all humans, and they're running this huge global organization. Again, I come from empathy because I know the leaders as people
and not lizard people.
Right. But at the same time, too, I think Facebook is not getting the credit for what they're doing, socially. So like on the platform, like, safety check, right, for natural disasters, of which we're having a lot. I mean, that's huge, or even like organ donation, or even at the local campus, the Facebook Academy, the summer internship program for low-income students. Those are the things that they are doing as well, but everything else is just overshadowing their great work.
Amazing examples of the power of sharing information.
Right.
And I think we talk about this on the podcast a lot, about businesses with kind of indirect business models, where we look at a company like Apple that makes things and sells things, and we buy them. And they have some data businesses that don't really do very well. And then we look at Facebook or Google or these companies that provide a service that as consumers we value. But how much do we value it? And, the price is our information to whomever for some unknown price, for some unknown use. And that's where it gets really tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. I find it interesting to observe elected officials, particularly dealing with Facebook or any other social media platform, because chances are those platforms help them get elected.
Right.
And, it's just kind of a double-edged sword. It's fascinating.
They have no idea what's going on. Right. So what motivated you to make a switch? You've kind of walked out of Facebook and into like a consulting role, and you're working with a bunch of different startups now.
Yeah, I had been there 5 years, and there was a ton of growth during that time. I mean, just incredible growth. And I had also been commuting like 3 hours a day when I would drive down there. So
it's inhumane.
Yeah, and that was just getting worse. But I didn't want to move either. So it was just more of a life decision. Like, okay, I think I'm done. I'm more of a builder. I learned over the years, and And I felt that I had built the foundation and I had hired a team by then, and it was just time to let them, take it forward.
Yeah.
So then I launched out on my own and really just wanted to leverage my skills in communications from all those years, and then also understanding through these experiences the impact of clear communication, particularly during crises, and then also M&As or IPOs, because I've lived through them all.
Yeah. Now, there's a diversity problem, maybe at that conference in particular. Yeah, how do you approach that? Or how do you approach maybe the startups that you're working with on how they view diversity and how they generate more demand from a wider group of people?
Well, I think there's two things. One is, diversity in tech is kind of an old topic now, because that started, I don't know, about 5 years ago. And living through that, and seeing how that evolved, like it or not, it happened, and that was good, right? So companies now are feeling more accountable to talk about that. But investing in all these programs for youth completely makes sense, but that's going to take a while, right? And these issues it's happening now. So what I see and what we discussed in Montreal was the need to have more diverse perspectives at the table. So, okay, if you take facial recognition as an example, so the findings show that the darker skinned females are the most misclassified group by facial recognition in AI, with an error rate of 34.7%. While lighter skinned males had an error rate of 0.8%. So that's scary.
Right.
Can you imagine if, a darker skinned female went in to get medication that was distributed through an AI tool, but was based on these percentages? I mean, that person could get medication that could adversely impact them. So the conversation today is with AI companies is, one, what's your message? What's your narrative? And who is speaking on your behalf? And is that person, are those people clear? And then two, because this is going to start happening more and more, what did it take to build this product? Were there diverse perspectives at the table? And someone could quickly turn around and say, yeah, but there aren't that many people of color in tech. That's not the point. They don't have to be a scientist, an engineer, or a researcher. Potentially, could it be somebody else? Could there be an external source, of diverse perspectives? But we're getting to a point where we need to have those perspectives, wherever they come from, at the table.
Right. Yeah, that's almost a shame that it feels like a tired topic. We very intentionally have hired up a pretty diverse team, with the idea that, well, first of all, you just look at the data. Like if you look at big companies that have diverse boards and women in power and people of color, they perform better on pretty much every financial or business or retention metric that you can look at. So it's almost like, we do it not because it's the right thing to do, because it's better, because it works.
It does work, right? How do we, and I've been having this conversation with some of the leaders in Latinx in AI, Black in AI, queer in AI, and women in machine learning. How do we help them? Right. So these organizations are fledgling now. They're the Latinx just launched in December. Black in AI has been around for a bit, and the others. But now they have a voice. And we had the first diversity town hall conversation in Montreal, and really educating the audience there. Why? Why is this needed? Why is a Black in AI needed? Well, it's about perspectives, right?
Right. I mean, if just practically, like if you look at how China is using facial recognition to, pursue criminals, for instance, maybe it's helpful or lucky that Chinese faces tend to be light-skinned, and the training sets probably reflect that, and maybe that accuracy, that 0.1% accuracy metrics a little better in China. But and not to say we're to borrow from China's policies on how we're going to use facial recognition technology, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, my question is to these AI leaders representing these underserved communities is, what is it? Do you all need more funding, to create more diverse data sets? Or is there a special effort that needs to be supported. So we're having those conversations now, because meanwhile, you have a lot of companies who would say, yeah, I mean, I want to contribute. I want to support those AI leaders, but they're not really sure either.
Yeah. Now, in the startups that you've worked with, speaking of pattern recognition, have you observed any patterns in the questions or the problems, specific maybe to communications and talking about themselves? Have you observed any kind of common thread between them that they're all having problems with specific to AI?
I think the common thread, particularly now, is how do companies, let's say in the HR area, right? How do they communicate the aspects of their product that make them different without making it sound like they're invading people's privacy?
Right.
That is touchy.
Yeah, that's
right?
a tough trade-off.
It's a tough trade-off because that is the intent of these AI tools, right? To be very specific and to access information that might not otherwise be able to be accessed. And in this case, with these AI HR tools, particularly around diversity, for example, that's pretty cool because this could result in more diverse candidates. But how they communicate it is critical.
Right.
Especially now with everything going on, in the world around privacy. So I think given today's landscape in tech, that's the number one issue is how do we communicate about our product without attracting negative attention, but also educating people enough on what the product is.
Right. And, we talked a little bit before we got started that All Turtles is, now that we're achieving some brand recognition and we have people publicly talking about us, we have a different definition for how we describe ourselves all the time. So we could use some of that help for sure.
Well, it's a constant, reiterating the messaging because as you grow,
right,
you grow, right? And so does the message. And like anything else, we learn over time. Like, yeah, that might have worked when we launched, but now we're 150 people, and that's not really that effective because that person I just overheard in the lunchroom does not know what they're talking about.
Right.
That happens.
Right.
It's just the nature of growth.
We'll have to see how many hours you have open to maybe work with us. Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I really appreciate having you on.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Here's a short segment which we haven't done before, capturing some of the conversation with Susan and I before the actual interview began. Susan asked me how I got involved in All Turtles, and so for the first time on the All Turtles podcast, I shared the All Turtles origin story. I love recounting the story of kind of how this came to be. This whole thing, like I met Phil in a conference room in a co-working space, and we had met at a restaurant, and we had a little too much to drink and got to know each other and found like all these Boston ties, and then he ghosted me for months, and I was at work and I got a text message from a random 617 number, which is a Boston area code, and it was like, "Hey, come meet me." I was like, "Who the hell is this?"
Okay.
And he's like, "It's Phil." I was like, "Oh, all right, where are you?" And I met him in a little room with a whiteboard, and he was drawing a product idea. And I just kind of sat there, and he wasn't talking to me, and I was watching him draw. And he's like, "What do you think?" And I was like, "I think it's this. I think it sounds like that." He's like, "Yeah, that's right." I was like, "Okay, like, what do you need me to do?" And he's like, "Well, I need you to do this." And I was like, I need you to be more specific. I don't know what you're talking about." And he's like, "Yeah, we'll start a company and you can be CEO. Do you want to do it?" And I was like, blink, blink, blink. Yeah, okay. And I went back to VentureBeat and quit. And then started on that idea like 2 weeks later. And it was a couple of months into it where I decided it wasn't a great idea, or it was a good idea for a product. It was a good idea for like Google to build this product, but a poor idea for a seed stage startup. And I said that to Phil, and he was like, "All right, I think I agree. So what do you want to do?" I was like, "Well, I want to work in venture." And he's like, "That's not on the table. Think of something else." It's like, okay. And I had met Jessica at this point, our co-founder, and we kind of like watched Phil he was a VC at a big firm, type of firm that writes like $10 to $100 million checks to growing startups. And Phil like wants to make products, and it just seemed incompatible. So I pitched to him. I was like, why don't we just do like an Andreessen thing at General Catalyst where we hire a bunch of product people and hatch product ideas. And, the good ones, GC will get first rights to invest in, and the bad ones will move on and try other things. And
oh, wow.
I don't, the timing was such, he was at GC for a little over a year, and I think he was bored. And Jessica and I pitched this idea to Phil, and he called me at some point and was like, what did you think if I left GC and just did the idea with you guys? I was like, yeah, that's great. You should definitely do that. He's like, I'd have to be CEO. I was like, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Better yet.
For sure. Yeah. And that was 2.5 years ago or something. And that's kind of how it started.
Congratulations.
It was a banana peel slip of an opportunity, but.
And there you go, right?
Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
And now it's time for an AI use case. Phil, you have one for us.
I do. It's actually an anti-AI use case.
Oh, perfect.
So we just launched a new product called Sift, which is it feels good to have like two things.
It feels so
launched.
good. It feels so good. It also takes some of the pressure off of me, which is nice.
Yeah, because you were running what was up to now the only launch product we had, which was Spot.
Right.
And now
There's
we have
more
Spot
coming.
and Sift. Yeah, there's more coming. There's we're basically what I've been telling people doing the investor pitching over the past few weeks.
Years.
Yeah, it feels like a few years. 6 months ago, all we had is like a whole lot of jazz hands and like discussion about the model and like no results. And now we have like a bunch of jazz cans and one really successful thing, which is Spot. And a year from now, we've got 5 more things that are going to be launching.
Right.
So we're going to be but now we have 2. So we've gone from 1 to 2, and we've got 3 more coming out by the end of the year. But Sift it's news therapy, right? So the problem is the news is literally making us sick. Like that is a literal statement. That is not a metaphor. The news is making us sick. And we want to help with that. We want to make something that reduces the amount of anxiety, depression, and burnout that people feel because of the news. And originally, we started out when we were designing Sift, very much this was going to be an AI product. We had a big role for AI in Sift, which was, I think we even maybe talked about it a couple of times on the podcast. It was going to be like an AI editor. We were going to use the AI to figure out what are the topics that are the most contentious, that are creating the most anxiety, and then use AI to actually do like the primary research and then have humans like do the writing. So it was going to be like AI editing, human writers. And then we just realized that the AI played no part in this, that like the AI was part of the problem, not part of the solution. And so what we really cared about with the solution, so even though we are an AI company, we were like, yeah, we're just not going to use any AI for this. And so the product that's launched is completely just human made, curated, researched, and written. And so I think it's a good anti-AI use case.
This might be the first time in history that someone has bragged about explicitly not building something with AI.
Yeah, and we were wrong about it. A lot of it was like I was wrong about it. Like I got excited about Sift years ago when we first started talking about this with Gabe and Compadonico and Chris Plug, the two people originally who kind of came up with this idea, and then others in the team. Like I was really excited about the AI component. I was always excited about the problem space, but I always thought AI would play a big problem, and just flat out wrong. And
you just said AI would play a big problem.
Yeah,
it did. Not a big role.
Yeah, a big role in solving the problem, and it turns out that it doesn't. So we don't have to use it.
So what's the experience like using this product?
So the key word is using, right? What we don't want it to be, the thing we kept coming back to when we were doing the design reviews is, I don't want people to think I read Sift. I want people to say I use Sift. So it isn't something you read. It isn't something you consume. It's something you use. It's a product. It's not news content. And so the experience is, in order to feel less stressed out, we're trying to give you more time with the topic, more space, and also make it actually tactile and interactive so that you're engaging physically more portions of your brain. You see things click. You're actually moving things around. You're wiring things up as a way to actually feel some sense of agency and understanding and control about the topic. So it's meant to be kind of a cross between a wellness or meditation app like Headspace or Calm and the news app. So it literally is news therapy. And the way that we measure its effectiveness, we did a several-month trial with, I think, more than 10,000 people, is we measure its success based on how effectively does it reduce anxiety. And so we measure that. We measure the anxiety, we ask for it, and we know that it's successful because it is actually reducing meaningfully, statistically significant anxiety,
Right.
while also increasing how informed people feel. But the point of this is not actually to make you better informed. The point of it is to make you feel the news differently and feel better about it and not be quite as freaked out because, literally the news is making us all sick.
So where can people use Sift? Where can people get it?
On a car, on a
Right.
boat, at home, anywhere where you feel anxiety. Right now it's iPhone only. So,
So literally everywhere.
yeah, literally everywhere. So yeah, just it's in the App Store. But I think I'm sure we'll talk about Sift whole lot more now that it's launched. But I thought as an AI use case, we still proudly say we're an AI company, and I think a big part of the reason why we can say that without laughing at ourselves is we have the confidence to know, when the AI is not appropriate, we just don't use it. We walk away from it. It's what Jessica's always been saying on this podcast, which is look, it's just a tool, and when it's not the best tool, you just don't use it.
Yeah.
Cool. Anti-AI use case. Thanks, Phil. And now it's time for a listener question. This comes in from May via email. Are there guidelines for technology adoption speed or tipping point? Do you consider this at all when investing? In other words, what percentage of the population needs to love a product or service so that the next influence segment, ideally a bigger audience, would adopt it? How many years does it usually take to go from those super lovers, the ones who stand outside the iPhone store, no, that was a store, to the lovers, the ones who are early adopters? And do you think this differs by industry or by country? What are the barriers? I ask because healthcare IT adoption is ridiculously slow. So I'm trying to get some insights.
We talked about this on a series that we did with Hemant Taneja and Rhonda Scott, based on the Unscaled book that Hemant put out, and his hypothesis, and I tend to agree with it. He is actually an investor, so he's the VC. We don't actually actively invest. We build things. We invest in our own stuff, and by paying for things that we build, but we're not actively looking to invest in other people's things. But Hemant is one of the best VCs in Silicon Valley. His thesis is that you don't need to scale first. You need to solve the problem first, and then you can scale. And I think we've really adopted that in our philosophy. So the way that I look at things is I want to make something that is a deep and meaningful solution for somebody for some problem. And as long as we make something that is the default answer to some people's question about an important question, where they think of okay, here's an important problem I have. This product is my default answer. It's my go-to. It's integrated itself so much into the fabric of their lives. Then that's successful. And if you only have one of those people or 10 of those people, that's fine. But you're just going to have a pretty expensive product. If you have 1,000 of them or 10,000 of them, that's also fine. So really, the number of people who you initially solve a problem deeply enough where you become integrated into the fabric of their lives, you become the default answer to some important question they have, that really just sets your price point. And it could be a very small number as long as the price point is relatively high and they're willing to pay it, or it could be a much lower price point if it's a large number. And then you can scale from there, but you don't need to scale. The scale is not the point. The point is in an economically sustainable way, solving some problem for somebody. And I think certainly in healthcare, I think May was asking about healthcare specifically, this makes sense. And Hemant had a long discussion about that, about how healthcare is really moving into solving specific sharp problems for subsegments of people and being able to kind of do that and string them together to get to scale.
Yeah, and I think the point about healthcare IT adoption being quote unquote ridiculously slow, I really feel that in my heart right now because I'm working on developing and selling a product for essentially for HR. And I don't think that HR tech necessarily adopts new technology ridiculously slowly, but I think the problems and the existing processes are entrenched enough that it makes it harder to adopt things really quickly, because it's really difficult to have agile processes around things that are very legally sensitive. And I think healthcare is also like that.
And just, both of those industries or departments are cost centers in the organization. They don't necessarily make money. So just another barrier to overcome.
Well, we have 3 products right now that we're working on in the broad health space. Basically, everything do, we've kind of focused everything we do on 2 focus areas. We're like All Turtles makes things that are about the future of work and the future of health. So like Spot is an example of something that's in the future of work. It's changing corporate culture. We have other products that we'll be releasing that are in the future of work, and then the other focus area we have is future of health. So there's several things we're working on. Some we've talked about publicly, like TELUS, which is the radar system for elder care, which is kind of amazing. And we have others that we haven't talked about as well that are trying to solve corporate health and wellness. And one of them is Sift. Like Sift, the new product we just launched, which is news therapy. Like to us, that is in the future of health. It is trying to solve this problem of extreme anxiety and depression and burnout that people feel from the news. So yeah, we're kind of going directly into the hard industries where adoption is quote unquote slow.
Right.
And we're trying to figure out how do we use that to our advantage, which basically means how do we make a product where we've pre-wired in the distribution models so that it works in our advantage. And a lot of startups fail to do this. They make something when they haven't just thought through, like, what are the price points? What are the distribution model? Like, can this actually survive by solving a sharp problem for either a small amount of people or ones where the adoption is slow or whatever? But as long as you take that into account from the beginning and you don't start building anything until you've kind of figured that out and sequenced it, then you can do it. So yeah, we have 6 projects right now split up between 2 industries, future of health and future of work. And both of those industries are traditionally thought of as being very difficult.
To this listener's point about like super lovers filtering down into, I think she calls them super lovers and lovers. I think for things where adoption is tricky or complex, I think one of the things that's helpful to do is to find the segment of the population that is already motivated, right? So for Spot, what that's ended up being are people-centered leaders, right? That is who we've landed on as our primary audience, like leaders in companies who already understand themselves as being people-centered and being invested in increasing employee well-being and fostering professional development rather than simply mitigating legal risk.
Exactly. And I think with Spot is a good example. We, right in the beginning, said, we're not going to try to convince anyone to use Spot that doesn't want to use it. Like, we're not here to change your mind, because it's like we just don't have the resources. It's super inefficient. At some point, we'll get to that. At some point, we'll get to dealing with the people who are like, oh, isn't this a bad idea? And we'll try to change their minds. But at the beginning, we're not looking for those people. We're ignoring them. We're looking for companies and people who want to use it, who already know why they want to use it. And then we're just trying to move them a little bit to actually go from wanting to use it to actually using it. And I think just in terms of general startup behavior, like that's a very good trait. Like you can't afford to spend time changing people's minds. You should find the people who already agree with you, who already very much want it, and then do the significant amount of work to move them from wanting it to actually doing it. But that's radically easier and more efficient than trying to change someone's mind.
Yeah. Considering the nature of the product, I am shockingly unconcerned with the haters right now.
Yeah. And I mean, and we did that obviously in a different extent, at Evernote. Like, we never tried to convince anyone to use it. If you didn't want to use it, we weren't going to argue with you. It's fine. It's okay. We just wanted the few billion people who did want to use it.
Right. Good question, May.
Yeah.
Thanks. This podcast is a production of the All Turtles Worldwide Media Empire. We recorded this episode in the world-class Donatello Studios in San Francisco, California. Thanks to Susan Gonzales for joining us for this episode. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, send us an email at hello@all-turtles.com. Marie reads every message. Thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, including Jim Metzendorf for editing, Marie McCoy-Thompson for production supervision and editorial management, Chris Plug for his audio expertise, Micah Rivera for our artwork, and Matt Ammerman for our theme music. On behalf of Jessica Collier, Phil Libin, and yours truly, John Cifuentes, and the rest of the All Turtles team, thanks for listening.